Section 3C.1.2 continued. Identical twins Oscar Storr and Jack Youth presented equally striking similarities. One was raised by his grandmother in Germany as a Catholic and a Nazi, while the other was raised by his father in the Caribbean as a Jew. Nevertheless, they shared traits and habits galore. They liked spicy foods and sweet liqueurs, fell asleep in front of the television, flushed the toilet before using it, stored rubber bands on their wrists, and dipped buttered toast in their coffee. Storr was domineering toward women and yelled at his wife, as did Yufei before he and his wife separated. Both married women named Dorothy Jane Scheckelberger. Okay, the last item is a joke. But as Judith Rich Harris 2006 notes, it is hardly weirder than some other reported similarities. Aided by publicity in magazine and newspaper stories, Bouchard and his colleagues, 1990, Dalala et al., 1996, Segal, 1999, located and studied 80 pairs of identical twins reared apart. They continue to find similarities not only of tastes and physical attributes, but also of personality, abilities, attitudes, interests, and even fears. In Sweden, Nancy Pettersson and her co-workers, 1988, identified 99 separated identical twin pairs and more than 200 separated fraternal twin pairs. Compared with equivalent samples of identical twins reared together, the separated identical twins had somewhat less identical personalities, characteristic patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting. Still, separated twins were more alike if genetically identical than if fraternal, and separation shortly after birth, rather than say at age 8, did not amplify their personality differences. Stories of startling twin similarities do not impress Bouchard's critics, who remind us that the plural of anecdote is not data. They contend that if any two strangers were to spend hours comparing their behaviors and life histories, they would probably discover many coincidental similarities. If researchers created a control group of biologically unrelated pairs of the same age, sex, and ethnicity who had not grown up together but who were as similar to one another in economic and cultural background as are many of the separated twin pairs, wouldn't these pairs also exhibit striking similarities? Joseph, 2001. Bouchard replies that separated fraternal twins do not exhibit similarities comparable to those of separated identical twins. Twin researcher Nancy Segal, 2000, notes that virtual twins, same age, biologically unrelated siblings, are also much more dissimilar. Coincidences are not unique to twins. Patricia Kern of Colorado was born March 13, 1941, and named Patricia Ann Campbell. Patricia DiBiase of Oregon also was born March 13, 1941, and named Patricia Ann Campbell. Both had fathers named Robert, worked as bookkeepers, and at the time of this comparison had children ages 21 and 19. Both studied cosmetology, enjoyed oil painting as a hobby, and married military men within 11 days of each other. They are not genetically related. From an AP report, May 2, 1983. We carry to our graves the essence of the zygote that was first us. Mary Pfeiffer, Seeking Peace, Chronicles of the Worst Buddhist in the World, 2009. Even the more impressive data from personality assessments are clouded by the reunion of many of the separated twins some years before they were tested. Moreover, identical twins share an appearance and the responses it evokes, and adoption agencies tend to place separated twins in similar homes. Despite these criticisms, the striking twin study results help shift scientific thinking toward a greater appreciation of genetic influences. Biological versus adoptive relatives. For behavior geneticists, nature's second type of real-life experiment, adoption, creates two groups: genetic relatives, biological parents and siblings, and environmental relatives, adoptive parents and siblings. For any given trait, we can therefore ask whether adopted children are more like their biological parents, who contributed their genes, or their adoptive parents, who contribute a home environment. While sharing that home environment, do adopted siblings also come to share traits? The stunning finding from studies of hundreds of adopted families is that people who grew up together, whether biologically related or not, do not much resemble one another in personality. McHugh and Bouchard, 1998, Plomin et al., 1998, Rowe, 1990. In traits such as extroversion and agreeableness, adoptees are more similar to their biological parents than to their caregiving adoptive parents. Mom may be holding a full house while Dad has a straight flush, yet when Junior gets a random half of each of their cards, his poker hand may be a loser. David Lycan, 2001. The finding is important enough to bear repeating. The environment shared by a family's children has virtually no discernible impact on their personalities. Two adopted children reared in the same home are no more likely to share personality traits with each other than with the child down the block. Heredity shapes other primates' personalities too. Macaque monkeys raised by foster mothers exhibit social behaviors that resemble their biological rather than foster mothers. Maestropin, 2003. Add all this to the similarity of identical twins, whether they grow up together or apart, and the effect of a shared rearing environment seems shockingly modest. What we have here is perhaps the most important puzzle in the history of psychology, contends Steven Pinker in 2002. Why are children in the same family so different? Why does shared family environment have so little effect on children's personalities? Is it because each sibling experiences unique peer influences and life events? Because sibling relationships ricochet off each other, amplifying their differences? Because siblings, despite sharing half their genes, have very different combinations of genes and may evoke very different kinds of parenting? Such questions fuel behavior geneticists' curiosity. The minimal shared environment effect does not, however, mean that adoptive parenting is a fruitless venture. The genetic leash may limit the family environment's influence on personality, but parents do influence their children's attitudes, values, manners, faith, and politics. Reifman and Cleveland, 2007. A pair of adopted children of identical twins will, especially during adolescence, have more similar religious beliefs if reared together. Kelly and DeGraff, 1997. Koenig et al., 2005. Rowan and Zana, 1996. Parenting matters. The greater uniformity of adoptive homes, mostly healthy, nurturing homes, helps explain the lack of striking differences when comparing child outcomes of different adoptive homes. Stuhlmiller, 1999. Moreover, in adoptive homes, child neglect and abuse and even parent divorce are rare. Adoptive parents are carefully screened. Natural parents are not. So it is not surprising that, despite a somewhat greater risk of psychological disorder, most adopted children thrive, especially when adopted as infants. Lolin et al., 2007, Van Gendorn and Jufer, 2006, Wierzbicki, 1993. 7 in 8 report feeling strongly attached to one or both adoptive parents. As children of self-giving parents, they grow up to be more self-giving and altruistic than average. Sharma et al., 1998. Many score higher than their biological parents on intelligence tests, and most grow into happier and more stable adults. In one Swedish study, infant adoptees grew up with fewer problems than were experienced by children whose biological mothers had initially registered them for adoption, but then decided to raise the children themselves. Borman and Sigvardsson, 1990. Regardless of personality differences between parents and their adoptees, children benefit from adoption. Section 3C.1.3 Heritability. What is heritability and how does it relate to individuals and groups? Using twin and adoption studies, behavior geneticists can mathematically estimate the heritability of a trait, the extent to which variation among individuals can be attributed to their differing genes. As Unit 7b will emphasize, if the heritability of intelligence is, say, 50%, this does not mean that your intelligence is 50% genetic. If the heritability of height is 90%, this does not mean that a 60-inch tall woman can credit her gene for 54 inches and her environment for the other 6 inches. Rather, it means that genetic influence explains 50% of the observed variation among people. This point is so often misunderstood that I repeat. We can never say what percentage of an individual's personality or intelligence is inherited. It makes no sense to say that your personality is due to X% to your heredity and Y% to your environment. Heritability refers instead to the extent to which differences among people are attributed to genes. Even this conclusion must be qualified because heritability can vary from study to study. Consider humorist Mark Twain's 1835 to 1910 proposal to raise boys in barrels to age 12, feeding them through a hole. If we were to follow his suggestion, the boys would all emerge with lower than normal intelligence scores at age 12. Yet given their equal environments, their test score differences could be explained only by their heredity. In this case, heritability, differences due to genes, would be near 100%. As environments become more similar, heredity as a source of differences necessarily becomes more important. If all schools were of uniform quality, all families equally loving, and all neighborhoods equally healthy, then heritability would increase, because differences due to environment would decrease. At the other extreme, if all people had similar heredities but were raised in drastically different environments, some in barrels, some in luxury homes, heritability would be much lower. Group differences. If genetic influences help explain diversity in traits such as aggressiveness, can the same be said of group differences between men and women or between people of different races? Not necessarily. Individual differences in height and weight, for example, are highly heritable, yet nutritional rather than genetic influences explain why, as a group, today's adults are taller and heavier than those of a century ago. The two groups differ, but not because human genes have changed in a mere century's eye blink of time. As with height and weight, so with personality and intelligence scores. Heritable individual differences need not imply heritable group differences. If some individuals are genetically disposed to be more aggressive than others, that needn't explain why some groups are more aggressive than others. Putting people in a new social context can change their aggressiveness. Today's peaceful Scandinavians carry many genes inherited from their Viking warrior ancestors. Nature and nurture. Men's natures are alike. It is their habits that carry them far apart. Confucius, Analects, 5000 BCE. Among our similarities, the most important, the behavioral hallmark of our species, is our enormous adaptive capacity. Some human traits, such as having two eyes, develop the same in virtually every environment, but other traits are expressed only in particular environments. Go barefoot for a summer and you will develop toughened, calloused feet, a biological adaptation to friction. Meanwhile, your shod neighbor will remain a tenderfoot. The difference between the two of you is, of course, an effect of environment, but it is also the byproduct of a biological mechanism, adaptation. Our shared biology enables our developed diversity. Buss, 1991. An analogy may help. Genes and environment, nature and nurture, work together like two hands clapping. Genes not only code for particular proteins, they also respond to environments. An African butterfly that is green in summer turns brown in fall thanks to a temperature-controlled genetic switch. The genes that produce brown in one situation produce green in another. Thus, genes are self-regulating. Rather than acting as blueprints that lead to the same result no matter the context, genes react. People with identical genes but differing experiences therefore have similar, though not identical, minds. One twin may fall in love with someone quite different from the co-twin's love. As we will see in Unit 12, at least one known gene will, in response to major life stresses, code for a protein that controls a neurotransmitter involved in depression. By itself, the gene doesn't cause depression, but it is part of the recipe. Likewise, the breastfeeding boost to later intelligence that we noted in Unit 2 turns out to be true only for the 90% of infants with the gene that assists in breaking down fatty acids present in human milk. Caspi et al., 2007. Studies of 1,037 New Zealand adults and 2,232 English 12 and 13-year-olds found no breastfeeding boost among those not carrying the gene. As so often happens, nature and nurture work together. Thus, asking whether your personality is more a product of your genes or your environment is like asking whether the area